we always go back to this point that in 2016, the Leave position, the argument they were always having, and at least in 2016, but like I say, it morphed into what it is today. Their position was always that we would be leaving the European Union politically, but we would be remaining in the single market and customs union. And of course, you know what's coming next. The line I always love to quote by Daniel, the brain of Brexit Hanan, the man who was advertised of, if you've got a Brexit question or a question about Brexit, Dan's the man with the answer. And Dan's position in 2016, at least before the referendum and during the referendum campaign itself, it was recorded live on TV, was that we were not talking about leaving the single market or customs union. No one's talking about that. Only a fool would leave the single market. And yet, just as with all the Brexit positions, Dan's position went from, yes, we're not talking about that, to actually, no, let's leave the single market, to now the position of, well, actually, leaving the single market might actually have been quite a bad idea. Just, you cannot make this up. You cannot make this up at all. But one of the big things that I think is stopping Labour, I think this is why this new survey is quite interesting. One of the things that is stopping Labour from rejoining the single market was that we would have to accept, obviously, the 4 freedoms. And one of those is freedom of movement, which many Brexiteers will say, well, that's the reason why we left, the EU. But according to this new survey, Leavers are actually quite in favour of freedom of movement. So this could mean that not only freedom of movement is a vote-winning idea, but even rejoining the single market and customs union, which, again, were the Leave positions. So if anyone tells you, oh, well, you're going against the will of the people, well, hold on. In 2016, you said that we will be remaining in the single market customs union. So how is Keir Starmer or Labour breaking the will of the people by doing that? And the simple answer is he's not, because there was never any plan for Brexit. But we go into talking numerous about different things. Like I say, I want to go into these surveys and, of course, all these new surveys and what this actually means for potentially in the future. So before we go diving into this, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and one after link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel that way. There's also the YouTube thank you button and, of course, the YouTube subscription down below as well. So thank you very much to all those who do support the channel. And today we go over to the Yorkshire Bylines with their article on this called A Memo to Keir Starmer. Freedom of movement is not toxic to Leavers. 6 years after the EU referendum, the Brexit project is in disarray. Predictions that Brexit would inflict serious damage on the UK economy have been confirmed by a series of authoritative reports. In June 2022 alone, the report from the Centre of European Reform estimated that the UK GDP is 5.2% smaller than it would have been otherwise. Investment is 13.7% lower. Goods trade is 13.6% lower. And a report from the Resolution Foundation estimated that Brexit will cost each UK worker £470 every year for the coming decade. And the Office of National Statistics reported the worst balance of trade figures since records began. And like I say, that was only just from 1 month. That was only just from 1 month. That's not even accepting the myriad we've had since this whole project began. So anyway, an early report in October of 2020 by the LSE, that's London School of Economics, estimated that the cost to Brexit to the UK economy is likely to be more than double of that of the COVID pandemic. a view shared by the chair of the Office for Budget Responsibility. And this was without full implementation of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, which the Minister for Brexit Opportunities said would be an act of national self-harm. Meanwhile, the problems of the Northern Ireland Protocol appear irreconcilable, and the government solution is to unilaterally cancel swathes of international treaties that they helped sign amid great jubilation, claimed as a diplomatic triumph only just 2 years ago. This now threatens to shred the reputation of the UK as a trustworthy partner in international affairs. This is a sorry state and is the widely recognised in opinion polls on the question whether Brexit is going well or badly, have now shown a steady deterioration in public support, with well over 3 times as many now thinking that Brexit is going badly than think it is going well, 54 to just 16. So you can see public opinion going exactly the same as we said with the Iraq War all those years ago. Anyway, it continues. The failure of Brexit is particularly salient to Labour supporters, with over 80% of whom think that Brexit is actually going badly, compared to only just 3% who see it as succeeding. So the obvious remedy is the readily available, and that is rejoining the single market at a stroke would overcome the barriers of trade with our European neighbours and solve the problem of Northern Ireland. But the Labour Party is not calling for a return to the single market. Indeed, while some prominent voices outside the Parliament, including London Mayor Sadiq Khan and a single Conservative MP, Tobias Ellwood, have come forward in favour, a series of senior Labour front benchers have stated that a Labour government would not pursue single market membership, and a Labour MP openly challenged this position was forced to retract. Striking a figure of the very reluctance of the Labour Party to actually campaign for single market membership is the very conspicuous absence of a plausible explanation as to why such a simple and powerful solution is being rejected. But a reason apparent from a recent study stems over rhetoric over the past 6 months, which has convalesced into a settled dogma that single market membership would mean the return of freedom of movement, which is believed would be an anger to the Leave voters that they would support that would otherwise withdraw the support from a party advocating it. But this is incorrect. Our data from representatives of an online survey conducted back in June of 2022, where participants were identified as Leavers, Remainers, or neither, in their response to a short questionnaire, with 3 Leave supporting and 3 Remain supporting, i.e., trying to identify a strong with the people who voted with Leave and Remain in the European Union, were presented with participants with a range of different scenarios and for the future of the Brexit process. Rather than asking them to identify their ideal or preferred outcome, we asked what acceptable each scenario would have been, with the aim of identifying outcomes that believed both Remainers and Leavers would be able to live with. In an earlier survey conducted with a representative sample of over 1,400 UK adults back in 2021, we found that, unsurprisingly, the scenario labelled an independent sovereign UK, essentially a hard Brexit, was acceptable to just 41% of Leave voters, but unacceptable to 64% of Remain voters. Conversely, a scenario labelled Rethink Brexit, meaning a second referendum, was acceptable to 65% of Remain voters, but unacceptable to 56% Leave voters. However, a scenario labelled A New Deal with Europe was acceptable to more than over 50% of participants and unacceptable to less than 20% in both groups. In the new survey, alongside the hard Brexit and a second referendum options, we offered 3 alternative visions of what a new deal with Europe might actually mean, further involving either free trade, freedom of movement, or both. In each scenario that was presented with detailed explanations and the rationale, a total of over 2,000 participants responded to the survey, with at least over 500 participants, 28%, self-identified as Leavers and identified as Remainers, and over 600 doing so did not express a Brexit identity. Overall, all 3 with the quote New Deal options were acceptable, as well, with over 50% of the participants, and unacceptable to only around 15%. In Figure 2, this data is broken down according with the participants' Brexit identities from the hard Brexit for the second referendum options. These results from the participants identifying as Leavers or Remainers were very similar to those obtained from the Leave and Remain votings just an earlier year. Unsurprisingly, a hard Brexit option, an independent sovereign UK, was highly unacceptable to Remainers, while the idea of a second referendum, the Rethink Brexit, was highly unacceptable to Leavers. However, the three New Deal options were all similarly very attractive to Leavers as to Remainers. For both groups, each of the free trade, freedom of movement, and the combination of both elements was acceptable to more than over 50% of these participants, and unacceptable to less than 20%. The participants who did not express a Brexit identity also reported a very low levels of unacceptability for all the New Deal options. So, what does this all mean? Those data actually suggest very strongly that the conventional wisdom is currently mistaken. While the meaning is spelled out, freedom of movement is not toxic to leaders, we who are almost positive about it as Remainers. Moreover, almost identical levels of support were found for the third option of a New Deal option, which envisages both free trade and freedom of movement, a close approximation to single market membership. Keir Starmer's response to Sadiq Khan's call for London to commit to rejoining the single market was to restate the position that he has taken on EU membership, that there is no cause for rejoining. This is false. There is an obvious case for rejoining the single market in relation to trying to algorithm. I don't know how you say that. Elmerizing the impact of Brexit on trade and the cost of living, and restoring the lost opportunities for UK citizens, reversing the shortages of labour, and in numerous sectors of the economy, reinstating the role of UK scientists in international research programmes and resolving the crisis in Northern Ireland. Rather than stating there is no case for rejoining the single market, it would be more transparent for Labour to spell out its objections. This is particularly important considering that the single market was not on the ballot paper back in 2016, and that leading advocates of Brexit, as we said back at the beginning, said that at the time, while leaving the EU, the UK would remain within the single market. We believe that if Labour were to set out this argument against rejoining the single market in return of freedom of movement would predominate. But the data suggests from that, far from alienating Leavers, the return of freedom of movement would actually be welcomed by a majority of both Leavers and Remainers. And I just want to go back to that because this data is fascinating when you look at it. And I think that this really does set a very interesting precedent because obviously going back and rejoining the EU either isn't on the table at the moment. But as I've expressed several times, rejoining the single market customs union, not only does it solve the Northern Ireland problem, it solves a whole swathe of issues that this country is facing. And it would be very easy to do, as you know, as a lot of commenters always say, oh no, it's impossible to do. We don't want you back. Well, which politicians don't want us back? They've all were back in the day very, very happy to let the UK stay in the single market. They were all very happy to say, yeah, you can change your mind if you want to. And if you want to rejoin one day, we're more than happy, welcome that scenario. There is no EU politician out there rejecting the idea that the UK cannot rejoin not only EU, but there is no EU politician out there advocating that the UK cannot join the single market or customs union. Indeed, it would be very, very easy to do because any laws or anything like that, we just do an EU bill like we did the past 2 times we've done this, just to go, okay, everyone, you've got a year exactly to sort of align with all the EU regulations. Pretty easy, to be honest. We've done it before, we can do it again. So it's not impossible to do. And like I say, doing that would actually solve a myriad of problems. It would solve a lot of problems. And this is something that David Cameron should have done way, way back in 2016. He should either A, rather than resign, should have said, okay, I'm not doing anything because it was too close to call. 2% is no reason to sort of purposely do the biggest overhaul of UK sort of, policy both foreign and domestic, since the Second World War, I ain't doing it. Or I'm having another referendum in about a year's time. Let there be a cooling off period, and this time the Brexiteers actually have to come up with a plan, force them into making a plan, or you just say, okay, UK people don't want to be part of the EU. Okay, we'll leave the EU politically, but we'll stay in the single market and customs union, which is what Leave advocated for. There is nothing stopping us from going back to that position. And I think all of us, as sort of rejoiners, should advocate for going back to that position, because it's not too far from going, well, since we're here, why not just take that next step? So, as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and one off-today's link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you all next.